almost at the end of Season 2, but join us next week for a final episode of this season when we feature the Best Corporate Citizen Awards among ECCU commercial banks.
Hello and welcome to ECCB Connects. This week we bring you part 2 of the 21st Sir Arthur Lewis Memorial Lecture with Professor Avinash Persaud as he speaks on the topic, the gig economy, secular stagnation, and Sir Arthur Lewis.
The great uplifting, ladies and gentlemen, poses two big questions. First, was it a one-off, a single step? Sir Arthur Lewis argued that as more people were pulled into the formal sector in developing countries, there would be a step up in their real wages, reflecting the transference of new skills or normalities. He thought of it as a small cliff, not an everlasting escalator. Unlimited supplies of low-skilled labor, he thought, would stop wages catching up forever. So will the favorable trends we've seen peter out? Will developing countries get tangled up in the middle income trap? The Caribbean seems to be trapped there. The second question is whether the great uplifting could have taken place without the stagnation of the incomes of unskilled workers in the advanced economies. Could we have avoided the events that led to Trump? I think the answer to both questions can be found in an analysis of how the global elite managed to do so well for themselves. This group championed the removal of all inhibitors to the easy movement of goods and capital around the world, unshackle the global economy and move government aside, they yelled. They claimed to be self-made men and chastised protectionism as corruption at worst and at best subsidies to the wasteful and inefficient. Yet, on closer examination, their cosseted status hinged on special treatment and indeed some forms of protectionism. These were most importantly in the field of education. At the same time as the great reshuffling was going on, the costs of going to college in order to become a lawyer, accountant, or banker skyrocketed. These barriers to entry acted like a large tariff against the spread of the benefits of professional education to a wider group. The returns to the professional education were then enhanced by the international spread of legal, accounting, and banking standards into global codes and standards. Today, ladies and gentlemen, there is a kind of imperial preference of codes and standards. Although the stated intention is to raise standards across the world, the manner of doing so has been discriminatory and protective of this northern elite. Standards have been spread to the rest of us from the northwest corner of the world. These standards are seen to be best managed by the professionals from those countries. These anti-money laundering and de-risking rules, for instance, instead of leading to a diversification of activities from the well-known centers of money laundering like London, Zurich, and New York, have led to increased concentration of financial activity there. Similarly, a recent EU study estimated that the underground economy in Europe represented 35% of EU GDP, much of it banked locally. Yet, we also know that there have not been and will not be any severing of correspondent banking relationships of these major EU banks. Having raised the demand for legal, accounting, and banking professionals, and then limited their supply with skyrocketing education and university fees, the global professional class then influenced policies that allow them to maximize their spoils. They pushed for easy monetary policies that supported financial and housing assets, which they owned disproportionately. They pushed for reductions in taxes. New analysis suggests that as much as half of the widening of the income distribution in the US and the UK followed the steep reductions in marginal tax rates, not increased international trade. President-elect Trump was one of those beneficiaries. The argument that he was the champion against the global elites is a little breathtaking, but it seems that the education of America has only just begun. My point, ladies and gentlemen, is that the developments we've seen in education, monetary and fiscal policy aggravated the reshuffling of global incomes, but were not essential to the reshuffling of global production. They could be reversed, narrowing the gap between the elites and blue-collar workers in the advanced economies without jeopardizing the great uplifting. Higher property taxes could have been used to fund reductions in the taxes of the less well-off, not those on the highest incomes, or could have more profitably funded widening access to professional education beyond the top 12%. Let me draw some final conclusions from these observations beyond the adjustments I have just mentioned. In the past, our governments thought that development was about attracting new foreign investment and giving incentives for firms to invest. But the mobility of firms and capital and the resulting deconstruction of the economic unit from firm to individual challenges all of that. We can only develop if we develop the assets and skills of our individuals. And because the unlimited supplies of unskilled workers caps real wages, we can only develop if we develop the assets of our least skilled individuals. This is a challenging idea, but it's also a liberating one. In this region, our challenge is not an underestimation of the importance of education. We all know Sir Arthur's dictum that the fundamental cure for poverty is not money but knowledge. The problem is that here in the Caribbean and in many developing countries, we have been pouring money into an old British-sourced educational system, one that they have long since abandoned because it was designed to identify the elites and discard the rest. For too long, we have concentrated our efforts and resources on the top 12%, who do well at common entrance and end up in our better schools and colleges, when it is the quality of the discarded 88% that will determine our development. Moreover, education is still thought of as something that people do at the beginning of their lives. The lessons of the gig economy is that the acquisition of skills is not an activity of the young, but something that has to be continuous if you don't want to end up on the down escalator in the gig economy. An 18-year-old with skills is in 10 years a 28-year-old with out-of-date skills. And this is not just about pouring money into the hands of the Ministry of Education, but rethinking what we mean by education, what its objectives are, and how it is organized. Public education in our countries is supply-driven. The state, the supplier, determines what is education, where it is delivered, and how it is delivered. Perhaps in order to better manage and match the knowledge with careers, we need to make the tertiary part of it more demand-driven, more influenced by the choices of individual students. Here is a thought experiment that shows the need and benefit for such a rethink. Imagine if you took the entire education budget and divided it by the number of students and gave this money to the parents to spend on accredited education. In this region, you'd be giving parents additional spending power of up to 4,000 EC dollars per child per year. And the vast majority of our kids, many of the 80 to 90% that our current approach to education writes off, would acquire more life-changing skills than they do at the moment. and would have more of a chance of changing the course of their lives. We can always spend more on education, but what we do with the existing budget is even more important. There can be no development unless we stop condemning the 80 to 90% of our kids, condemning them with low expectations, demotivated teachers, and worse. That is our most pressing economic challenge. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish to end with a few personal thoughts. I was inspired to become an economist by my father, Professor the Honorable Avinash Persaud. He passed away on July 25th of this year, leaving those who knew him bereft. My father worked a little with Sir Arthur Lewis when he helped run the Institute for Social and Economic Research for the Eastern Caribbean in the early part of his career. A decade or so after Sir Arthur moved to Princeton, my father became head of economic affairs at the Commonwealth Secretariat in London. There, he became one of the principal benefactors of economists from the West Indies and the developing world, appointing the best to international panels, committees, and consultancies. One of the ways Sir Arthur Lewis inspired a generation of West Indian economists inspires, I hope, our children and kids at the back, is that he taught them not to be intellectually shy and not to shy away from applying technical economic prowess to good political causes. My father helped to design the economic sanctions against apartheid South Africa and the development of the UN's Vulnerability Index, which was an attempt to divert more resources to small states that might otherwise appear too well off to deserve them. He was economic secretary to the great international economic commissions in the 1980s and 1990s, such as the Brandt Commission, the South Commission, the Brundtland Commissions. From that position, my father became one of the leading developing country voices on international economic affairs such as trade, the spread of technology, and climate change. He played a significant role in shifting the thinking on the value of openness, technology, and the environment. While his ideas have proved poignant and lasting, those who knew him well would tell you of a softly spoken man of grace and kindness. I can't tell you how many people have touched my life with kindness because they said he did so to theirs, gave them their first job, or when times were tough, came to visit or lend a hand. The inspiration I draw from his life is that one can be both unyielding in adherence to rationality, in observation and judgment, while being compassionate and generous in the way you live your life. I dedicate this lecture and my career to him. Thank you very much indeed.
You're watching ECCB Connects. Join us next week for a final episode of Season 2 when we feature the Best Corporate Citizen Awards among ECCU commercial banks. And now for this week's financial tip.
Keep a log of daily expenses, and before you go shopping, make a list so you can focus on your needs and not your wants.
To view any episode of ECCB Connects, anytime, any place, at your convenience, check out our YouTube channel, ECCB Connects.
We've come to the end of this another episode of ECCB Connects. Remember, ECCB Connects is produced by the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank to help you understand who we are, what we do, and how we serve you. Do join us again next week for another program.